Trophic levels and energy transfer in ecosystems. Ecosystems are complex networks of organisms that rely on each other for survival. Within these ecosystems, there are different levels of organisms that play specific roles in the transfer of energy. These levels are known as trophic levels, and understanding them is crucial to understanding how energy flows through a food chain. Energy transfer through the food chain. In an ecosystem, energy flows from one organism to another through feeding interactions. This energy transfer creates a food chain, which shows the flow of energy from producers to consumers. A food chain is a series of organisms that interact with one another in terms of consuming and being consumed. It shows how energy and nutrients are transferred from one organism to another. In a food chain, each organism occupies a specific position or trophic level, which determines its role in the transfer of energy. A food chain demonstrates one path of energy transferred from one organism to another in an ecosystem. At each trophic level, there is a loss of energy. In fact, only about 10% of the energy is transferred from one level to the next. This means that if a producer captures 100 units of energy, only 10 units will be passed on to the next level of consumers. The rest of the energy is given off as heat from the process. Producers, the foundation of the food chain. At the base of the food chain are the producers, also known as autotrophs. There are typically plants, algae, or some types of bacteria that are capable of producing their own food through photosynthesis. They harness the energy from sunlight along with water and carbon dioxide to convert it into usable energy. This usable energy comes from glucose, a sugar. Oxygen is a product produced that is given off. For example, consider a grassy meadow. The grass in this ecosystem is a producer, as it uses sunlight to make its own food through photosynthesis. It forms the foundation of the food chain by providing energy to the organisms that consume it. Examples of producers include plants, trees, and algae. The primary consumers, herbivores. Moving up the food chain, we encounter the primary consumers, also known as herbivores. These organisms feed directly on the producers. They rely on plant material for their energy and nutrients. In our grassy meadow example, the primary consumers may include rabbits, deer, or other herbivorous animals that graze on the grass. They obtain their energy by consuming the grass, thus transferring the energy from the grass to themselves. The secondary and tertiary consumers, carnivores and omnivores. Beyond the primary consumers, we find the secondary consumers and tertiary consumers. These are carnivores or omnivores that feed on other animals. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, and tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. For instance, in our grassy meadow, there might be a snake that preys on the rabbits. In this case, the snake is a secondary consumer as it obtains its energy and nutrients by consuming the herbivorous rabbits. Similarly, a hawk that preys on the snake would be considered a tertiary consumer. Some food chains have additional levels, such as the quaternary consumers, carnivores that eat tertiary consumers. Organisms at the very top of a food chain are called apex consumers. Generalists. A generalist is an organism that feeds at more than one trophic level. For example, in the food web below, the kit fox is both a secondary consumer and a tertiary consumer. It is a secondary consumer because it eats the ground squirrel, a primary consumer, which eats the plants, producers. It also eats the scorpion, a secondary consumer, which eats the grasshopper, primary consumer, which eats the plants, producers. Decomposers, nature's recyclers. In an ecosystem, decomposers and detritivores play a crucial role in breaking down organic matter and returning nutrients to the soil. Decomposers are microscopic organisms such as bacteria and fungi that break down dead plants and animals into simpler substances. They release nutrients back into the soil, which helps plants grow. Decomposers can also help to break down pollutants and toxins into less harmful forms. This helps maintain the overall balance and health of the ecosystem. On the other hand, detritivores are small animals like earthworms and millipedes that feed on dead organic matter. They help break it down into smaller pieces, making it easier for decomposers to do their job. They are detritus, dead material, eaters, or debris eaters. They are usually multicellular animals such as earthworms, crabs, slugs, or vultures. They not only feed on dead organic matter, but often fragment it as well, making it more available for bacterial or fungal decomposers. Both decomposers and detritivores are crucial for nutrient recycling in ecosystems, ensuring that dead matter is broken down and valuable nutrients are returned to the soil for new life to thrive. They include bacteria, fungi, and insects that feed on dead plants and animals. As an example, in the grassy meadow, decomposers would break down the remains of plants and animals, returning the nutrients back to the soil. This process enriches the soil and allows the cycle to continue. The food web, a complex network. When a food chain demonstrates a singular path of energy between organisms, a food web reflects the complex interconnections between multiple food chains within an ecosystem. In our grassy meadow, the food web would involve various organisms at different trophic levels. For instance, a fox might consume the rabbits, and raccoons might consume both the herbivorous animals and smaller prey. Additionally, the fox and the raccoon might have other prey items or organisms consuming them. In a food web, the arrows represent the flow of energy. Therefore, they are always going from the organism that is eaten to the organism that is eating it. For example, the energy arrow would go from the rabbit to the fox. It would not go from the fox to the rabbit. Trophic pyramid. The trophic pyramid is a representation of the different trophic levels within an ecosystem. It shows the decrease in energy as you move up the food chain. The base of the pyramid represents the producers, followed by the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and finally the tertiary consumers at the top. Importance of having more producers and less tertiary consumers in an ecosystem. Having a larger number of producers in an ecosystem is crucial because they capture and convert sunlight energy into organic matter, which serves as food for other organisms. Without producers, there would be no energy input into the ecosystem. On the other hand, having fewer tertiary consumers is important because they require a large amount of energy to sustain their population. If there are too many tertiary consumers and not enough lower-level consumers, such as primary consumers, the ecosystem can become imbalanced. This can lead to a decrease in the population of lower-level consumers, disruption of the food chain, and ultimately a decline in the overall health of the ecosystem. In conclusion, trophic levels and energy transfer are essential concepts in understanding how ecosystems function. Producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and decomposers all play vital roles in the flow of energy through a food chain. By maintaining a balance of these trophic levels, we can ensure the health and sustainability of our ecosystems.